Williamson. We've got a few visits to make. Barbara Williamson. I don't know if anybody's even... 1 minute till, I guess. We're not ready yet? Oh, ladies' class. I'll wait another minute. Yes, sir. Man, you looking sharp. You want to pass them out? How many visits do we have today, Elizabeth? We got about 12. Hello, Howard.
I'd say, hello, my favorite preacher. I'll tell you a story about that.
All right. All right, I'm calling it. Is it 9 o'clock? All right, we got some visits to pass out real quick, and I'll try to make short work of this. We have Barbara Williamson. She's got an upcoming surgery. Okay, thank you. We've got Velma Emberlin. She's got some ongoing health issues. Jeff Beam. Jeff is facing cancer diagnosis and needs our prayers, please. Jason Merciers. Jason Merciers. Mary Alice Grimes. Margie Washington. Oh, really? Check with Evelyn Phillips. Velma Floyd. I'll take that one. Okay. Mary Willis. Sorry. Andrew Cannon. Andrew Cannon, serving in the military. Wayne Pylan. Would you like Wayne? Wanice Young. Last one. Okay. Thank you. Don't fall asleep. Well, as you can see, Marco's not here, so I'm covering for Marco again, and we hope he's getting better. I think he's feeling some better, we hope, but just not up to coming today. So I'm going to continue on with what we were doing Wednesday night, and I'll review real quickly for that. Can y'all hear me okay? Okay. I've got a ear stopped up, and it feels like I got a seashell up against my head. You know, it's kind of... So if I'm screaming or if I'm not talking loud enough, just bear with me. So I'm going to try to get through this. What we were talking about Wednesday was the Bible uses a term that is, we don't use a lot. It's the term take heed. And if we were saying that in English, that's English, but if we were saying it in our vernacular, what would we be saying? We'd be saying what? Pay attention, okay? And that's what I used to hear all the time in school. Pay attention, okay? Or my mom and dad, pay attention. So the Bible has a lot of examples of pay attention. And I think God in the way He wrote the Bible is trying to get our attention, isn't He? So take heed. Now I'm going to cover a few just to go back over some who weren't here Wednesday night. We talked about taking heed about the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees. We talked about that was in Matthew chapter 6, verse 16. That was basically the idea. Pay attention to what you believe, what you're teaching, what you're doing as far as religion goes. We talked about being deceived. We should pay attention, not be easily deceived by the world or by those in the religious world even. We talked a little bit about deceiving little ones. The Bible's very harsh about that. We also talked a little bit about taking heed that the light that is in you is not darkness. That's found in Luke chapter 11 and verse 35. And that's the idea. Take heed, look internal. Be careful that you're doing what you need to do. It's basically the idea of self-examination. Make sure that you are doing what is in accordance with what God wants you to do. 1 Corinthians 10 verse 12 talks about take heed lest you fall. So if you're at that point to where, I've got this all under control and I got this figured out, well, be very careful because you may not have it all figured out and you may be in trouble. So be careful, take heed lest you fall. We talked some also about taking heed about our liberty, the things that we can do to make sure that we're not putting stumbling blocks in front of other members of the church or in front of those that are in the world. There's certain things we can do, of course, in the context of 1 Corinthians chapter 8 and verse 9. It is talking about, in that context, about the eating of meats offered to idols, and in the context, the point is made that an idol is nothing and you can eat that meat and God doesn't care, it's all good, no problem. Meat's there, eat it, no big deal. But in the context of throwing a stumbling block in front of somebody, make sure that your weak brother is not looking at you going, oh, well, that's okay to do, and therefore cause him to sin or to stumble in his own mind and his own conscience. So it's an idea of, in 1 Corinthians, training the conscience to know right from wrong. But don't throw things in front of your brothers and sisters that are going to cause them to stumble and fall. And be very careful of our liberty. Talked a little bit to refresh on that, like I made the point of, if you're drinking an IBC root beer on Friday night sitting out in the parking lot, well, that may look, well, hey, he's drinking, he's doing nothing wrong. But yet, to someone who might see that, you might say, hey, Leslie was out there drinking with the rest of them. Shouldn't be out there with the rest of them if they're doing something wrong, of course. That's whole nother issue. But doing things that may not be an issue, be careful how people see that when you're doing it. So we don't need to throw stumbling blocks in front of people. I think that goes into how we dress, all kinds of things like that. And there are many things that are stumbling blocks to our brothers and to those in the world. The next thing I wanted to, real quick, anybody come up with anything they want to discuss? If you were here Wednesday or today, is there any comments on that before we get started with the new material? That was a quick synopsis, I guess. Okay, we're going to look in Galatians chapter 5. Galatians chapter 5, and we're going to look at verse 15. Galatians chapter 5 and verse 15. And this is talking a little bit again about the words liberty used there in verse 13. But there at the end of verse 14, you shall love your neighbor as yourself, but if you bite and devour one another, beware lest you be consumed by one another. So there's that word, beware, take heed, that we don't consume each other. Now, is that a problem in the church? What? Can be, can it? To consume each other is to get in an argument about something. Me and Howard get in an argument. Should we not be able to handle that in a Christian way? We should be able to take care of that as brethren. But a lot of times, what do? We get mad, get upset, and we end up holding those real strong feelings about this, whatever situation it is. Now, a lot of times it's just a matter of opinion about something, isn't it? Have you ever known congregations to split over something that you're going like, how did that get to that point? It was just a disagreement about, the old thing is about the carpet in the building, you're renovating. And, we had that happen a while back. We renovated and got different carpet. Well, and we asked for votes, and we said, hey, who likes this color and who likes that color? Well, what was the percentage? It was actually pretty close to 50-50. So that's a scary thing. And you're going, okay, well, we got to make this decision. And 52% like blue and 48 just really like green or whatever the color was. I don't know, or red or. What are you automatically going to do?
Usually it's not just one thing.
It is a multiple.
You might have that one thing that occurs, one event that occurs, and then people say, ugh, because of this. But in reality, it's built up over time.
An underlying issue.
That, this little thing happened, that little thing happened, that little thing happened. But so what you're doing there is, the point is to build relationships. The point is to nurture those relationships. And so when we say something wrong, and we will, when we say something wrong or we do something wrong, the best thing is to, for one, apologize and be humble. And another is to, go ahead and treat them well and not be ignoring them or being ugly to them, and definitely not talk about it.
Good point. Good point. A lot of that goes to the, the Bible talks about condemning, spreading things around sowing discord among the brethren. And that's a hard thing to sometimes not do, but it is common, isn't it? And we got to be real careful that when we get in an argument, that I'm not just trying to, fight with Howard all the time, or I don't want to talk to him anymore. And, you see what Howard did. I'm using Howard. We've got no disagreement, trust me.
That's one of the things right here in this big auditorium. If you've got people that sit over there, and you've got people that sit over there, and they never talk to one another.
Right.
You think people that visit here don't notice that? So what you've got, you need to make sure that you're being a family, that you're being kind and courteous to each other. It doesn't mean you have to run across the building every single time you're here. It just means that it needs to be, they need to feel warm.
And we're not talking about that you have to be best buds with everybody in the congregation. You know and realize that if you've been around people very long, you get along with this person. I mean, you've got common interest. It's not that you don't, like Howard and I'm using him because we have a lot of common interests. We like airplanes and stuff like that, and guns and all kinds of fun stuff, So we get along real well, so we can sit and have a conversation, and someone else, I might not be able to do that. So, but that still has the idea when you have a disagreement, don't go after somebody. That's the idea of consuming someone, is to, I'm gonna get them, It's that idea.
That's the point I was going to make, Leslie, is that sometimes, we're not going to get along with everybody the same. There's some people that we have more in common with, and we're easier to talk to them, and we just have a closer bond because of that. Even Jesus had close friends.
Mm-hmm. Good point. Jesus had close friends as well. He was a little closer to some of his apostles than he was other apostles. So.
But sometimes there's people that just rub us the wrong way.
Right.
And when we encounter those people, we still need to treat them with kindness and love, and not ostracize them or talk behind their back and make them feel. A lot of times what happens is people come to church, they get treated badly like that, and they're like, why do I want to be around those Christian people who can't even show me kindness? And so that's one way we bite and devour and drive people out of the church. And we want people to come in because even though we may not have a closeness with them because of their personality or something like that, there may be somebody else in the congregation that does get close to them.
Right.
And we're all a family, and we need to promote that as much.
And using the word family too. Sometimes you get along. If you've got a big family, I've only got a brother and a sister, but I can tell you when we were growing up, and even as adults, do you ever have a disagreement with your brother or your sister, or you're going like, I could, Me and my brother used to settle ours like this. So, but you know what? I love my brother. Does that make sense? So you don't, hopefully in your family, if you have a disagreement with your brother or your sister, you don't go after them. I mean, you have your disagreement, but hopefully you alleviate that a little bit over a few days maybe, right? Scott? Okay, he's saying, in other words, sometimes there's agitators that have problems with a lot of people, but we've got to make sure we address that in the correct way. And sometimes that, if you see someone that is trying to consume somebody or consume everybody, or is, sometimes that has to be called out. I think I heard you right, because okay. I appreciate that. All right, any other comments, Howard?
I had a friend at Skyline who, he was a heathen, but he had some pretty good common sense. One of his kids confronted him about respect. You don't respect us. And he says, no. You earn my respect. I owe you courtesy.
So the idea of
Courtesy covers a lot.
we owe each other, even though we might have a problem with somebody, we do owe them courtesy. So I think that's a good point. In other words, we have to be careful that as we have our disagreements, not to let those things blow up and create issues, because there's plenty of things we can disagree about, but there's a lot more we can agree about in the church. So we should be focusing on the things we all agree on and not be dwelling so much on what we disagree on. And that if we did that, we'd be a lot happier group, wouldn't we? And I'm not saying we're an unhappy group. I'm just saying we'd be a happier group. So it is important for us to be very careful how we interact with each other. Don't go after each other. Don't consume each other. Galatians 5:15. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about taking heed to is found in Colossians chapter 4. And we're going to look in verse 17. And I think I hit a little on this maybe on one of the other topics. We talked about being deceived by what we believe and things like that, but I'm going to expound a little bit on it. Colossians 4, verse 17 says, and say to, I don't know if I'm going to say this right, Archippus? Close enough, right? Take heed to the ministry which you have received in the Lord, that you may fulfill it. And this is, of course, the end of the book of Colossians, and he is encouraging him to take heed to what he's received. Now, how do we relate that today? When we've received the gospel in this room, we are members of the church, and we have received the good news of the gospel. We become Christians. What does that mean there when he's telling them, take heed to that? What does that mean for us today? If we can learn from what he told him, what's he telling us to do? What's that? Tell other people, for one thing. Okay? And aren't we a lot of times we're afraid to do that? You know, we kind of, I don't know if I need to get into that right now. You know, sometimes we do that. But we need to be willing to tell somebody, right? That's taking heed. If it's important to you, give it to somebody else.
You've got to take the chance to tell them about the Lord. You're going to be sometimes rebuffed, and you can even lose friends over it. But you've got, as a Christian, I feel, let tell them.
What's the word you might use that you have I think the word obligation. Isn't that the way the Bible teaches it? That you've received it, you're obligated and instructed. And I'm going to get into that. I'm going to take over on Sunday morning here in another few weeks. But we're going to talk about owing. What do we owe somebody? You know, we take pride in, I don't owe anything to anybody. Or, you know, you've heard that statement. I'm debt free, right? That's a good place to be, isn't it? As far as money goes, debt free. Well, we do still owe people things, don't we? I owe you things, you owe me things, we owe God a lot of things, and we're going to get into some of that as we go through that class, but we are obligated to take heed to what we know. And what we know is more important than anything else. When we're talking about spiritual things, hopefully what you know is more important to somebody than anything else they could know. Is that not right? That's kind of a weird way to say it, but it's important, isn't it? So we are obligated and need to understand the importance of taking heed to the ministry, to the things that we have heard. Now, another thing about taking heed is the idea of speak the truth, isn't it? That's the idea of speaking what is true and not what is false.
Yeah, I was going to add, there's more to ministry than just teaching people about Christ, because once you become a Christian, a minister also may help with questions and difficult situations and things like that, caring for one another. And so, being able to provide teaching and service, looking out for other people's needs and stepping in and taking time to help them through difficult times, those are also aspects of ministry that we're called to do. We're called to look out for our
Not just the initial teaching of the gospel, but as we grow as Christians, we're required as older Christians, as more mature Christians, to help those that are starting off, aren't we? It's the idea of maybe being a counselor to somebody. They've got a question. Hey, I obeyed the gospel, but what do I do in this situation? Well, we were all there, weren't we? Because it's a matter of growth, and as we age and get older, we might have a little insight into something that they might not understand. And that's a big thing about the ministry is take heed to that as well, don't we? Don't just, a lot of times we get someone baptized and, oh, okay, well, they're good. Well, that's not the correct way to look at it. It takes a lot of growing and maturing to get to the point they need to be. We all do, don't we? Steve?
I was going to say that Greek word that's used for minister there also means servant.
Servant.
So he's saying pay attention to the needs of others that you can find ways to serve others. Looking for when, kind of piggybacking off of what Matt said, you're paying attention to what's going on in the lives of others so that you can minister to them, that you can see whatever it is that they're needing and fulfill that, take care of their needs.
The idea Steve's talking about is paying attention. If we pay attention, as the theme of our lesson is, what are we seeing? We're seeing what people need, what's coming around. Are they dealing with something that maybe we need to help them with, or is there some, and that could get into financial help or spiritual help or just being there as a friend, just to kind of talk about things. A lot of times that's what we need, and that's part of ministry, isn't it? Continuing that idea of helping each other, being a servant to each other. Let's look over at 1 Timothy. 1 Timothy chapter 4. This is just kind of piggyback off of this. This is one we often quote. 1 Timothy chapter 4 and verse 16. And of course, being written to Timothy as a young preacher, it is, Paul says here, take heed to yourself and to the doctrine, continue in them, for in doing this you will save both yourself and those who hear you. That kind of wraps up just kind of what we're talking about. But taking heed to yourself, that's a self-examination. Make sure that you're found in the faith. Make sure that you are not thinking, oh, I have arrived and therefore I don't have to pay attention to those things. Saying take heed, be self-examining, and also take heed to the doctrine also, or what you're teaching someone. Same idea as we just discussed. Matthew chapter 6, let's look over there at that. This is an interesting one because we want to do what is right, and we want to do what is good, and we want to be a good example to those around us. Matthew chapter 6 and verse 1, start talking about taking heed to how we do certain things. It says, I lost my place. Take heed that you do not do your charitable deeds before men to be seen by them. Otherwise, you have no reward from the Father in heaven. Therefore, when you do a charitable deed, do not sound a trumpet before you as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may have glory from men. Assuredly, I say to them, they have their reward. But when you do a charitable deed, do not let your left know what your right hand is doing, and that your charitable deed may be in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will himself reward you openly. We should be doing a lot of good work, shouldn't we? Do we need to always do those good works and make sure nobody ever sees us doing anything good? What's he trying to tell us here? Be aware, pay attention. Okay, it's a lot of it's the attitude, isn't it? And can you tell the difference? If you've been hanging around someone for very long, can you tell the difference of what's being done? And I don't want to name or anything. Have you ever known anybody that's doing something just because they want everybody to see them do it? I tell you what's amazing to me is you see foundations sometimes, and someone has given a donation to that foundation, and it might be a huge amount of money, $100,000, anonymous, and I think that's pretty incredible, isn't it? In other words, someone has said, I feel good enough about this place that I'm going to give this kind of money, and yet I don't want my name out there. Why might that be? Maybe they're living by this, hopefully. And even small donations, you see anonymous. And it's not that we have to, make sure nobody knows when we're doing anything good, but isn't it a matter of attitude of how we do things?
The Pharisee and the publican. The publican was seen praying, but it was his attitude that he wasn't doing it to be seen, where the Pharisee was all about, look at me, look at what
And the Pharisees and the Sadducees had a big problem with this, didn't you? There's several different places where Christ addresses that as far as they were all out to be, because if you know the context, they had their certain kind of robes and all the things they had to wear, and we're going to be seen down here at the square, and we're seen at the temple, and we're doing all these awesome things, and a lot of it was as a show, wasn't it? And basically he's saying, be careful, take heed, that you don't just do what you're doing just to be the showboat, so to speak. You can do things behind, and you know what? That's what's awesome about a congregation as you get to know what people are doing. I hear about stuff that people are doing. I'm going like, I didn't know they were doing that. But they know they're doing that, and God knows they're doing that, don't they? So we've got, and I think a lot of the ladies, and you guys do a lot of things that are behind the scenes, and men too. And you come in and you go, well, when did that get done? Well, somebody just did it. We don't have to get up and announce every time somebody's done something, because that's between you and God, and between, things are getting done in the congregation that need to get done. And very thankful for that goes on, but we're not to be doing that just to be seen, just to be, hey, look what I did, look what I'm going to do, I'm doing this, and I'm giving this, and so very important that we take heed that we're not doing just to be seen. Has anybody noticed anything like that before? I know I'm probably not the only one over the years that you've been Christians. There are certain times that does come into play. All right, any comments on that? All right, another take heed, Luke chapter 12. Luke chapter 12. We're going to look at verse 15 in this one. Now, a lot of this comes into play with the doing good deeds. It could. Talking here about being aware of covetousness. Now, covetousness could be that wanting that praise from somebody. That we can covet. We don't necessarily have to covet just things. We might covet praise, mightn't we? We're all wired a little differently, but this is a good step here to come off of that. Matthew 6, but it says, Take heed and beware of covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of things he possesses. And don't we, in America, are we not hung up on that, it seems, as a society? We see people's things, and that we sometimes judge their worth by what they have, don't we? Do we need to be very, very careful about that, don't we? It's a common thing in the world, and it's a common thing it can be common among Christians as well, if we're not very careful. For one's life does not consist of the abundance of the thing he possesses. If that were the case, what would be a problem? What would we have to be doing if that's to prove our worth? What do we have to get involved with? Make more money. Anything to make more money would be our goal. And that would, of course, lead to much more covetousness and greediness of gain. In Exodus chapter 20, verse 17, the first time we really started hearing about covetousness is when, what was being written around the Exodus time? 10 Commandments, the children of Israel coming out. And that is the 10th commandment, is that we're not to be covetous. Now, what does he list there? It's actually in Exodus chapter 20 and verse 17. And what does he list there, if y'all remember? He said, okay, he actually has a list there. It says, don't covet your neighbor's house. That's pretty... Have you ever went by somebody's house, new house, and they're going like, wow. You know, we live in a nation where we've got mortgages up to here, and, you know, what's the old saying is, you're trying to keep up with who? The Joneses. Man, the Joneses must have been rich. I got some kin folks that were Joneses, and I don't know if I'd want to keep up with them. They didn't. If I was keeping up with them, I wouldn't have very far to go. Good people, but, you know, not a lot of things sometimes. But the Joneses must be really rich because that's who everybody's chasing, right? So keeping up with the Joneses, do not covet your neighbor's house. Next thing on the list is don't covet your neighbor's wife. Yes, Matt.
I was going to say, a lot of it, we're getting at is the attitude. But, it's kind of like the guy, he had everything, his barns were full, and yet he wanted to tear them down and build bigger barns. It's kind of like that chasing after wealth for the sake of, you think that's where your security is. And I think that's where the real problem comes in. Because, Abraham was a wealthy man, but when it came to giving to God, he was not covetous. He gave to God as God expected him to.
That's a good point.
So, it's don't put your money before God, but be a good manager of the things that you have so they can benefit other people.
It's amazing how we think we get to this certain point and we're secure. But what does the world, if you've been around very long, I'll use the stock market crash of whenever that happened, back before the Depression. 23, okay. Matt was there. He was watching the ticker come off. I don't know how they did that, but anyway. Yeah, there you go. So coming up 23, huh? Let's hope not. But that could be the case, couldn't it? And we often put our security in things, don't we? Oh, look how much I got in the bank. Look how much I've got in my house, and things. And things can happen, can't they? And history is a prover of that if we just pay attention. But it says don't be trying to keep it. Abraham, as Matt mentioned, was a wealthy man, and some of the great men of faith in the Bible were wealthy men, but they were wealthy toward God first of all, and then they were wealthy in the world's things, and it never got in the way of how they thought of God, or in some ways it actually increased their faith in God because of what they had, and that should be our attitude. If we have things, we should be thankful to God, and it's very important that we do that. Keep things in perspective. So it says, do not covet your neighbor's wife. Do not covet your neighbor's male servants or female servants. Do not covet your neighbor's ox, okay, or their donkey, or anything that is your neighbor's. Now, we might read that and say, well, my neighbor don't even have a donkey, so I ain't got to worry about that, right? Well, what might we be coveting? Not their ox and their donkey. Of course, if Rodney were here, he might covet somebody's donkey. He's not here today. If you know Rodney, he's got some good mules and donkeys and things like that. That might be an issue for Rodney because he might see his neighbor's donkey and he need to curb that a little bit.
Might be a bigger issue for
Might be, that's right. Rodney's neighbors may be the one coveting his donkey. That's right. Or his ox. But what might we covet? We talked about a house. I deal a lot of times with the kids over the last few years. Well, as adults too, what do we like to think about sometimes? They're so expensive right now, I don't want to think about buying one. What? A car, right? And it's, what's that? Zero-turn lawnmower. Wow. That might get me right there, Steve. Ernest has a good zero-turn lawnmower. But zero-turn lawnmowers are quite the thing, aren't they? I mean, that's a sweet piece of equipment. That's probably my worst thing is a nice tractor. Like Roger's got a good tractor, okay? So I may want Roger's tractor. And I think he got a zero-turn lawnmower he'd sell real cheap right now.
Leslie, those tractors cost more than those cars.
They do. Tractors cost a lot of money, don't they? So we get into these things, you know. We're sitting here reading in Exodus, and we're going, oh, well, you know, ox and donkey and all that stuff. We don't think about that. But we do covet a lot of things, and we're in a rich country, aren't we? Isn't it amazing how much even the poorest in our society is more wealthy than other countries' wealthy people? But yet we see people around us have something that I don't have, and I want that. Now, there's a thing about you can want something and say, I'm going to go work and get that, as long as you keep it in perspective and say, I'm still putting God first. I'd like to have that zero-turn lawnmower. Okay, well, go work for it, get a good job, but don't let the zero turn get in front of God. Or the bass boat. Exactly. There's the bass boat right there.
Take care to say, I'm going to set my offering aside so I can get my zero-turn radius.
Yeah, if my offering goes down $50 a month because I got to make the payment on my zero turn, well, you know, maybe I ought to rethink that zero turn. Get that push mower out.
You know, years ago, I was working in a doctor's office doing some construction, something or other. And he was in there, I guess he wasn't finished with his day's work, but anyway. And I was teasing him about he stayed working late so he could make another payment on his Mercedes. And he said, you know, there's not a whole lot of difference in the way you live and the way I live. It's just a different level of poverty.
There you go. He was talking to a doctor and talking about making another payment on that Mercedes, and the doctor was working late, and he said there's just different levels of poverty in there. My dad made a comment today. My dad's supposed to have a test of some sort, and he says, yeah, I guess he thinks I need it, and I need this test. And he goes, but I think sometimes it's the doctor needs to make a payment, so he decides I need a test. So we hope that's not the case, don't we? Sometimes we're skeptical like that. But being covetous is a major problem, and we got to be really careful that we don't get caught up in that. Any other comments about that?
I was going to kind of feed off that. It says, life does not consist in the abundance of things. And so, you know, the implication here is that really abundant life is living and walking after Christ.
An abundant life is...
Serving with others. And if you have an abundant life, you're going to get a bigger reward from that than anything that possessions can provide.
And he describes that abundance. We're not judged on the abundance of what we have. We're going to be judged on the abundance of our spiritual walk, aren't we? Cody.
I know it's something that we talked about in the book of Ecclesiastes. Solomon had access to everything possible in this earth.
And yet he wrote a...
Everything was made unhappy. Everything was made when you don't have God at the end of your life.
Very good point. Cody's bringing up Ecclesiastes, written by King Solomon, who had more than we can ever imagine. And yet he writes a book. If you read Ecclesiastes, you're like, wow. You know, you're going, wow, this is just not worth anything, you know. And it's a matter of, at the end, summed up, it's a matter of our relationship with God is what is most important, not what we have. Solomon had more than anybody. We can't even hardly imagine some of the things he had. Molly.
Going back to the good works, I knew I was trying
Matthew 5:16.
Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. So there is
There,
something to people see, but not for the right, you got to do it for the right.
there is that thing where God does say He wants us to do those good works that we might be seen of men. But it's the attitude, isn't it? And that's what we've talked about. If we never see each other doing anything good, we might have a problem, mightn't we? If you never see me doing anything good, I've got a problem. But it's the attitude, isn't it? If I'm showboating this, and this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm doing, this is what there's a difference, isn't there? And we know that. We can see that. Roger says people are going to see what you're doing, whether it's good or bad or nothing. Okay, very good.
I often think of the story of the talents. Christ gave the talents to the individuals, and He expected them to be productive with them. And the ones that were productive with them, God blessed them with more. And I think that's the attitude we should have, is that whatever God blesses me with, I need to find a way to make it more productive for Him. And if we have that attitude, then I think we'll be better off.
Idea of taking what we've got, what God has given us, making sure we're using it in the proper way. He gave us those talents and those abilities, so we need to be using them for His benefit and our spiritual growth. Good. Anything else? All right, we're going to look over at Hebrews chapter 3 and verse 12. This is another dire warning to me, to Christians. Hebrews, of course, written to Hebrew Christians. In Hebrews chapter 3 and in verse 12, it says, "Beware, brethren, lest there be in any of you an evil heart of unbelief in departing from the living God." Verse 13, "But exhort one another daily while it's called today, lest any of you be hardened through the deceitfulness of sin." Now, when we get into this, it's scary to think that, as members of the church, we can lose each other, can't we? Can I fall away from God? Can you fall away from God? And there are doctrines and beliefs around the religious world that I can never fall. Once I'm saved, I'm a Christian. I'm good. And that is false doctrine to the highest. And it takes our guard down, doesn't it? But he says here, take heed, be careful, be aware that you don't have that evil heart of unbelief. Now, what does that look like? What does the evil heart of unbelief look like? If you're looking at yourself, what's that going to look like to yourself? It's kind of a weird question, but when you're looking at yourself, what's it going to look like? Are you going to wake up one morning and go, I believed in God yesterday, but hey, I don't? That might happen, but how does it usually happen? Just gradually, doesn't it? Just a slow decline. You may think back 10 years ago and you think, well, I did this, and this, and this. But over the last 10 years or so, you know what? I just don't care about that. I don't want to do that. I don't like doing that. And it's not and I'm not talking about things as a matter of age that we can't do anymore. I'm talking about a matter of attitudes and trying to find other good things to do, because there's plenty of good things as we mature as Christians that we can keep doing, isn't it? And the Bible teaches about as we grow weaker in our bodies, what is our spiritual being? I didn't put that down, but what should our spirit be doing as we get older? Getting stronger, right? As our bodies grow weaker, our spirit should be stronger. The day we leave this earth, if we adhere to what God wants us to do, the day we die and step off into eternity, that ought to be our strongest day, shouldn't it? It will definitely be our weakest day, physically, won't it? But it should be our strongest day spiritually. And hopefully we're all trying to kind of go that direction, aren't we? And if we don't, if we're growing weaker in body and we're also growing weaker in spirit, we've got a big problem, don't we? We've got to be very careful, be wary.
It's
So in other words, the idea he's bringing up here is that unbelief can be just a matter of a little lack of faith on not praying as often as we should, should we not be asking God for what we need? The Bible teaches us that we are to ask, and I think we forget about that, don't we? That's part of not having the faith that we need, and that evil heart of unbelief. Well, God can't fix this. This is just too much for God. Well, if we do that, we better be very careful. Is it time? Time? Okay. All right, I expect Marco will be back maybe next week. We'll see how that goes. Of course, I think there's a rumor he's got a child coming or something. I don't know. I don't know. He talks about it every once in a while. He mentioned it a time or two. But anyway, I'm sure he will be back when it's convenient, or I'll pick up in a week or two. I appreciate all the input and the help today.